Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's another rainy day here in Manila, which reminds us once again of the very reason why we're actually here today climate change. And as we head into COP29, the urgency to address these challenges are very crucial, especially for a country as vulnerable as the Philippines. And we are thrilled to have some experts, incredible guests with us today that will help us break down what's at stake for the Philippines as we head to Baku, Azerbaijan next month, and what can we as journalists can do to amplify these critical conversations. So let me first introduce our speakers who will be sharing with us today. First, we have Niner Giao from Parabucas, who will walk us through the key climate issues for the Philippines at COP29, introducing us to the importance of finance, loss, and damage, and the global push for climate ambition. After the presentations, we will open the floor for your questions. So feel free to ask anything about the topics we discuss. So the floor is yours, Niner. Hello. May ulan ba dyan where you're from?
Yes, bumuhos na ang ulan dito sa'min, I'm afraid. So, if medyo choppy ang internet, pasensya na po.
Yeah.
Um,
So we're here now with journalists. Most of them are actually first time reporters for COP, and I think it will be very helpful for them to have an overview of what happens at COP and what are the things na you think would be very important for them to report on.
okay, sige, sounds good. I've shared my screen. Is it visible?
Here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So, COP this year is going to take place in Baku, Azerbaijan from November 11 to 22, no? There are a number of things that the COP29 presidency, so that's the Azerbaijan government, has already declared to be their priorities, which I'll just walk everyone through today. Very briefly lang. And then if you have additional questions, I will try my best to answer. Um, but in general, for COP29, there was a presidency letter, a COP29 presidency letter was released back in July 2024, which identified two pillars of the COP29 vision as pathways to delivery of outcomes for COP29. No? So these two pillars are referred to as enhancing ambition and enabling action. So for enhancing ambition, they wanted to be able to set out clear plans to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach and to leave no one behind in accordance with the purposes, goals, and principles of the Paris Agreement. If you recall, the Paris Agreement has three long-term goals. No, so the first is on mitigation, which is to try to keep increase in global temperature to 2 degrees Celsius, but with best efforts to keep it at 1.5. And then another one is a long-term goal on adaptation, so on increasing resilience and reducing vulnerability. And the third on finance flows. No, so it's enhancing ambition is bringing us closer to achieving those goals. Um, and achieving those goals, they said, includes parties signaling their determination to act through ambitious, comprehensive, and robust NDCs, so nationally determined contributions, NAPs, national adaptation plans, and biennial transparency reports. They're also encouraging wider engagement in international cooperation in order to achieve this one pillar of enhancing ambition. So I'll go into that a bit further later in relation to the Philippines. The second pillar is enabling action. And I think this is the one, this is the pillar that's been receiving a lot more attention lately. So it's about putting in place the means of implementation and support and the wider enabling conditions at the national, regional, and global level, including all stakeholders. So when you say means of implementation and support in relation to the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, what you're actually referring to is finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. In this case, this COP is referred to right now as the finance COP. And it's referred to as the finance COP because aside from the many agenda items on finance, spanning from guidance to the funds um, to reporting to this one, the adoption of a new goal. It's really going to be broadly a discussion on finance, how it is transferred, how much has been transferred, and who will be transferring and who will be receiving. And that all boils down to the conversation on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. So it has been identified by the COP presidency as its top negotiating priority. They want to be able to come up with a fair and ambitious new collective quantified goal on climate finance. So it's, in short, it's referred to as the NCQG. And this NCQG has to be adequate to the urgency and scale of the problem. It has to take into account the needs and priorities of developing country parties. It has to include full scope and potential of resources that are needed to be made available according to the COP presidency. They also mention Article 6, which many might be familiar with as carbon credits or carbon markets, as something that has to be resolved after quite some time na laging stalemate yung discussions or laging hindi nakakapag-adopt ng decision in certain aspects. And then there's also, of course, as many of us might be aware, loss and damage and the fund responding to loss and damage. So these are the two pillars that the COP presidency identified as their pathways to delivery for this particular COP. So I tried matching the priorities of the Philippines and the presidency. No, so the COP presidency outlined, enumerated a number of work streams or agenda items, and in comparing it with the priorities of the Philippines right now, I would say that for sure, the two priorities that match would be the new collective quantified goal and loss and damage. There are others that we can discuss further later, but these I think are the most glaring priorities that match between the two bodies, two stakeholders. So the new collective quantified goal is CMA 6 Agenda Item 11.A. It's the background is basically that parties were requested to agree on a new collective quantified goal on climate finance before 2025. So that's this year. And they are doing this from a floor of $100 billion a year. So this $100 billion goal was actually something that was set back, I believe, in 2009 or 2010, with the developed countries committing to mobilize this amount annually for developing countries. But as time went by, it was people realized, or it became apparent that this goal is not being met. So because of this, during the Paris negotiations, the Paris Agreement negotiations, they decided that it was time to come up with a new collective quantified goal on climate finance that would be coming from that 100 billion goal as a floor moving forward. No, so it's been a long process since then, and now is the time, or this COP is the time when they are supposed to adopt this new quantified goal. They're taking into consideration the annual report of the co-chairs of the ad hoc work program, which has been going on the past year, including a substantive framework that they produced as a draft negotiating text that was meant to capture the progress that has been made, and the summary of deliberations at the recent high-level ministerial dialogue in Baku. So the things that are to be considered in relation to the NCQG. So it's bound to be a very difficult negotiations process. Very very a lot of elements that need to be hashed out, and these elements include, for example, the quantum. So that's the overall amount of the NCQG. What is the overall amount supposed to be? For the Philippines, for example, the position of the Philippines is that the overall the quantum should be at $1.3 trillion per year. No, so there's also the structure. Is it supposed to be? Do we just give a single amount and then bahala na, or is it an onion model? For example, identifying core amount of public funding, for example, and then with another layer of private funding or investments or that kind of thing. Is it supposed to just identify thematic areas, like a certain amount of money, or maybe a percentage of the quantum going to mitigation, another percentage or amount to adaptation, another percentage of or amount to loss and damage. So these are all considerations that need to be discussed and decided on at COP. There's also the time frame. How should the target be mobilized over a particular time frame? Is it every 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it an annual amount? Should reviews happen? When would that review process, how would that review process take place in terms of timeline? And when would the goal be revised, if ever? There's also modality. Should the finance given be in the form of grants? Are we allowing loans? Should it be highly concessional modalities? In terms of sources, is it supposed to be public finance, private finance? The donor base is also garnering a lot of attention right now because is it supposed to be purely developed countries, or should countries that are uh, rece- uh, reaching a certain amount of GDP, for example, or are emitting a certain amount of greenhouse gases, be included among those that should be providing finance or mobilizing finance. And then there's the recipient base. So are all developing countries allowed to access these funds, or should certain regions or classifications like small island developing states or least developed countries supposed to be given priority? So these are all considerations going into the negotiations that will hopefully be resolved within 2 weeks of negotiations. No? So that's the NCQG. For loss and damage, there are actually four agenda items. One is on the joint annual report of the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impacts and the Santiago Network for averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. So that's quite a mouthful. But basically, the SBI, so the subsidiary body on implementation, and SUBSTA, subsidiary body of science and technical advice, if I'm not mistaken, are actually just invited here to consider an annual report produced by the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage and the Santiago Network that would include draft rules of procedure on how to move forward on its operationalization or its continued operationalization. So this annual report um, is supposed to form the basis of a draft decision that is going to be adopted or recommended for adoption by the COP, and it contains information on organizational and procedural matters that need to be resolved. So it's mostly operational in nature. There's also the actual review of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impact. So, this review of the mechanism happened back in COP25. It's COP29 this year. And it was decided that the next review would happen this year and then every 5 years thereafter to ensure that there is progress being made and the objectives are being met by the Warsaw International Mechanism or the WIM. So they actually adopted the terms of reference for this year's review. So a terms of reference for each review is supposed to be adopted. Um, and for this year, the for this COP, the review will be taking place based on the terms of reference that were already adopted last June. No? So the review will address the WIM structure, output utility, responses, and collaboration with the loss and damage funding arrangements, including the new fund. So it's about how these entities are going to be working together, moving and coordinating moving forward. So, in preparation for the review, a summary of views was received from the parties and from non party stakeholders that will also serve as an input. And the background paper will also be discussed no, and serve as inputs to further discussion. So, that's the second agenda item on loss and damage. there are two more. So one is on the report of the fund for responding to loss and damage and guidance to the fund. If you recall, the Philippines is now the home of the board for the fund for responding to loss and damage. No, so I used to refer to it as the LDF, the Loss and Damage Fund, but apparently the correct way to refer to it is the FRLD, which is the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, and the Philippines is the host of the board. So there will be reporting taking place at the COP. The board of the fund will submit their annual report to the CMA and the COP, including a report on its high-level dialogue on coordination and complementarity. And the COP and the CMA, so the CMA is the Conference of the Parties, uh, meeting as the serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. So it's the basically it's the COP of the Paris Agreement. Um, and they will be invited to consider the report of the board and to take action. No? So whatever action they deem is appropriate will be taken. Finally, there's an agenda item on arrangements between the Conference of the Parties and the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement and the board of the fund for responding to loss and damage. So the Standing Committee on Finance was asked to draft procedural arrangements for the operationalization of the FRLD. Um, and the CMA and the COP will be invited to consider these draft arrangements, and to take action it deems appropriate to work out how coordination will happen between all of these bodies. So, sorry, this is a repetition, right? So generally, when we talk about loss and damage, a lot of it is operational right now. But we need to take a look at loss and damage also as a cross-cutting thematic area. As mentioned earlier, there is a discussion under NCQG that touches on whether certain amounts of money should be provided or should be allotted to certain thematic areas, and loss and damage is one of them. So it would be interesting to see how loss and damage is treated in the NCQG, because there are some parties that take the position that loss and damage should not be included at all in the NCQG, and there are some that, of course, insist that loss and damage should be given an allotment under the NCQG and should be given particular attention. So finance here for this COP is a key to enabling action. It has always been the key to enabling action. It is a position that the Philippines has always taken, and developing countries in general have always taken. Um, it's important to note that country needs and priorities have already been identified in NDCs and NAPs, but of course they are ever evolving depending on the developments that happen within a state, and that finance gaps tend to vary. So the NCQG ideally was meant also to address or to cover identified finance gaps. But the question is, how much is the finance gap really? There are a lot of numbers that have been floating around. A number of numbers have been floating around, and some have even gone up to 5.7 trillion of climate finance being required annually between now and 2030. Um, so this is the reason behind different countries taking the different positions in relation to what the quantum amount should be in the NCQG. There is no question, however, that more finance is needed in order to enable action in relation to climate change. There are other work streams to look out for that may be interesting that are not quite as prioritized. I would say by the presidency. There's just transition that the just transition work program, rather, where parties are supposed to operationalize or adopt a decision that would operationalize and set out a work plan for the just transition work program. So this is in relation to the work program that was launched or adopted back in COP27, that touches on economic diversification and transformation and a just transition of the workforce and the creation of decent work and quality jobs. So this work program, it developing countries are saying that there is a need for a work plan to be adopted, and this is in line with the elements that have previously been identified already as part of the work program. So it's a question of how to lay out the objectives and the timeline and the deliverables of this work program. And then there's the global goal for adaptation. So Article 7 of the Paris Agreement established the global goal on adaptation, which is supposed to be on enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change while contributing to sustainable development and meeting the long-term temperature goal. Um, back in I believe last year, the UAE framework for global climate resilience was adopted, and this framework identifies targets that are to be met ideally by 2030 in relation to adaptation. So the discussion point now, when it comes to the global goal for adaptation, is to identify um, indicators for adaptation. So there should be an indicator mapping process and criteria for indicator identification that will be discussed at this year's COP. Among the target, and this is supposed to lead to achieving the targets, the 2030 targets under the Global Climate Resilience Framework, which has to do with NAPS, which is also particularly relevant to the Philippines, as the Philippines um, has among it is recognized among in Philippine policy that adaptation is the priority of the Philippines. No, so by 2030, parties are ideally supposed to have up-to-date assessments of climate hazards, climate change impacts, and exposure to risks and vulnerabilities, which would inform their NAPs and other climate change policies, plans, systems, and services that are appropriate. The NAPs should be country driven, gender responsive, participatory, and fully transparent. There should have been progress in the implementation of the NAPs, and they should be designed. There should be an established and operationalized monitoring, evaluation, and learning system for national adaptation efforts. So these are considerations going into COP, bearing in mind what has been historically what have been historically priorities of the Philippines. Um, yeah, so I think that's it. But I'm happy to take questions and give my best effort in responding to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Niner. So everyone who would like to ask questions, feel free to do so in our comments. We'll address them. But siguro for me, how I think baka sobra pang abstract, but on the climate finance side, how do you think like does the Philippines plan to push for equitable finance at COP29? Um, parang how is our coming from discussions in the past years, how is our and we've seen this like madami talaga from the BOF are coming to COP to really push for equitable finance. But how do you think this will play with the new team of NCQG? Like, will we be able to see where uh, will we be able to get the amount of money we're trying to? Of course, not really sure, but is this like a really push to the right direction, or do you think it's actually a setback that we're getting this NCQG? Mas malaki ba ang makukuha sana natin kung nag-focus na lang sa ibang mechanisms?
I think very helpful naman to be able to arrive at an NCQG, no, for the Philippines in particular. Um, if you recall, our NDC is really, well, primarily based on the amount of funding, the support that we receive in order to implement the activities we have identified there. So I think if only for that, an NCQG would be ideal, since it's obvious that the finance that has been going around or that has been mobilized in past years is not sufficient. So, and that would go for everyone. So, parang ideally, what we are hoping the Philippines would push for, and that we are hoping um, would come out in the NCQG, is for the recipient base to be broadly developing country parties, no, with siguro with emphasis on those that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts, to the adverse impacts of climate change, which the Philippines is. um, Nagiging question lang there is how we are going to, how acceptable it is for the Philippines, for example, to um, add a provision, provide provision on SIDS, so small island developing states, and LDCs, for example, receiving more attention, or receiving a floor of a particular amount. So, but every mention of parties that are more vulnerable to that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change includes the Philippines. So I think either an NCQG would be good for everyone. It's just a matter of ensuring that the provisions or the conditions that are set out in the UNFCCC, in the Framework Convention, and in the Paris Agreement are still observed. Because right now, based on the draft text that has come out there, it's really leaning more towards private finance and investments, um, which is a bit, does not, it's not exactly what the treaties have laid out uh, expressly, no. So yon, so it's a question of how hard, or how firm developing countries will be in pushing for public finance.
Yeah, and I think just to help our reporters here on the call, and I know most of them are not really business reporters, how do you think we can basically simplify it to the public? So parang puro trillions, trillions, and we're
Mhm.
talking about like billions, and we're also, we still haven't gotten clarity that there's a 100 billion dollar pledge before. So how do
Mhm.
you think they can simplify those numbers to their audience?
Okay, I think I'm not a math person either. So this might help. So this might help. Um, so when we talk about climate finance, kasi, the basic premise there is that it is supposed to be new and additional. And when we say it's new and additional, it's supposed to be above official development assistance, no? So that means it is separate from ODA, because we don't want there to be a double counting of sorts, no. So parang we don't want it to overlap. We want to emphasize that there should be premium, or um, there should be particular attention given to climate action, and that it merits a fund of its own, or if it merits a finance of its own. So so it has to be new and additional, and also it has to be based on the provisions of the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC. It is generally supposed to be public. So parang by public, it means that the governments are supposed to provide it or mobilize it. Why? Because it is a treaty. So this means states are the parties to it, no? So private corporations, private entities cannot be bound by treaties. So hindi mo sila mahahabol. Kaya ang gusto ng developing countries, public funds, kasi pwedeng habulin ang governments, ang states, no? So um, now, the discussion on provision, there is a debate, or there is some friction between the use of the term provision and mobilization. So when you talk about providing finance kasi, it means that the donor base, so developed countries, if we follow the convention, are supposed to give finance to developing countries. They're supposed to provide. When you say mobilize, they are supposed to facilitate, 'di ba? Parang yun yung ano doon. They're just supposed to facilitate the transfer of finance. They can try, but if it doesn't work out, they still tried, 'di ba? They still tried to mobilize. So, provide is always more appealing for developing countries to push for. Although, of course, there's a very strong pushback in relation to that. So for the NCQG, what developing country parties are trying to protect or ensure is that there is still a core amount of public finance that will be provided. Their parties, of course, understand that it's difficult to reach those amounts, no? So those massive amounts annually, just based on public funds. So there's now this debate where kaya ba siya ng public funds? And kung hindi siya kaya ng public funds, what other kinds of funds, including private, can we look at in order to reach these targets? Um, these targets, so yun yung sinasabi nilang onion model na merong core na public funding and then may iba pang layers of other modalities or sources of finance. Um, yun yung magiging isa sa mga sticking point talaga ng negotiations because for a lot of countries, and if you read the text now, there's actually an option for there to be just an investment quantum. So investment amount lang siya. Biglang nawala yung core na public finance. So merong options na ganun. That's why it's bound to be a very contentious and difficult negotiations process in the next coming weeks. No, so yun. So those are the things that we try to keep track of, whether or not it's public funds, who will be the donor. Ang argument pa sa donors dyan is sino ba talaga magbibigay? Kasi under the convention, dapat developed countries to developing countries. But uh, the tag or the title of developed countries seems to have changed in the past years, no? So countries that are recognized as developing countries under the convention seem to now be actually developed countries. So dapat ba pati sila isali na sa sa magbibigay ng magmo-mobilize ng funds, or do we protect the status quo under the climate under the convention? So there are all of these debates. I hope that kind of shed a little bit of light on, on part
And
of
I
the.
guess it's also important to explain to our reporters in the call right now which groups are we negotiating with.
Mhm.
Um, because I think most of them is gonna be their first time going at the COP. It's gonna be very difficult to navigate the negotiations from
Mhm.
the media center alone. So maybe you can tell them hindi wala tayo nung ano nung bilog-bilog pero maybe we can tell them like sino ba yung mga kasama nating nag-negotiate ngayon.
Okay, sure. Okay. So ito, it's usually, so there is a division between developed countries and developing countries normally in terms of, especially in the negotiations of finance, no, in financial support, capacity building, ganyan, technology transfer, um, and these developed countries, if we go to the root of it, under the convention, there is an Annex 1, which identifies which are the developed countries. And if you're non-Annex 1, then you're a developing country. Countries like China, Brazil, India are non-Annex 1. So under the convention, they're still developing countries. But the current state of the world says otherwise. So this is one sticking point in the negotiations na bakit hindi pa rin sila nagte-take on ng same responsibilities or commitments as the other developed countries when actually they have been emitting as much if not more than some developed countries, diba? So there's that. Um, so it kind of there's that kind of complication when it comes to the negotiations. And in the negotiations, there are negotiating blocks. So these developed countries generally have groups. There's the umbrella group. There's the EU, of course. There's the environmental integrity group. So so these groups of countries usually have share the same views in when it comes to finance. For developing countries, there is a giant negotiating bloc called G77 in China. It's composed of more than 130 countries and China. So I don't know why. I don't know why China has been separated from the name, but that's the case. And usually these countries, they try their best to have the same positions, no. So under G77 and China, there are subgroups. There's the African group, for example. Um there's AOSIS, so the Association of Small Island States. There is LDCs, least developed countries. There is LMDC, like-minded developing countries. There's BRICS, so sila Brazil, India, China, and South Africa. So there are these subgroups that also need to come to positions of their own. So we negotiate with them, and usually we arrive at positions that everybody is okay with supporting. The complication there is arriving at decisions at these positions requires um, everybody to agree, or well, nobody to say no, no. So kailangan may consensus on the positions before they are carried by the group. So consensus has to be arrived at by the subgroups, and then the subgroups will need to arrive at consensus for there to be a position sa G77 and China mismo. So, but we negotiate with them. We are normally on their side. But it doesn't prohibit countries, individual countries whose positions aren't carried by the group to put forward their own positions. So, for example, as Philippines, wala tayong subgroup. We're not a member. We tried joining AOSIS, but sabi nila hindi daw tayo small island state. Marami tayong small islands, pero hindi tayo small island state. So we generally have to push our positions to the G77 and China main group, and then our positions that are not carried forward, we can raise ourselves on the floor. It's of course it's going to be a bit harder to push for that position kasi wala kang rest back, wala kang walang kumakampi sa right away. But you are not prohibited from doing so. And the system of the UNFCCC ideally encourages that or supports that because adoption of decisions in the UNFCCC is also by consensus. So it makes the process so much harder, so much longer because nobody should be saying no to any of the things that are included in the decision. But at the same time, it tries to ensure that even the smallest state, if Vanuatu ka or Marshall Islands ka or Kiribati ka, if you say no, then then it's no. Diba? So it's still something that should be given the utmost attention.
Yeah, I think we can also talk about two other things aside from the NCQG, yung NAP and Article 6. Any updates on our we actually invited them to join us to talk about the National Adaptation Plan of the Philippines. But maybe you can but they weren't able to join us. Busy din siguro during this time of the year, but maybe you can tell our journalist friends here about what has been talked about in our national adaptation plan. I know there are a lot of stakeholder conversations as well. In-open nila yung ano yung mga nangyari na and yung mga new things that they included in the NAP. Maybe you can tell us some of the things na nadagdag or napalitan.
Naku, I'm sorry, hindi rin ako update. I've also been wanting to get more updates.
Yeah, ako din, hopefully, I'll be able to help you guys and update you kasi di rin ako nakasama dun sa huling stakeholder meeting. I was out of the
Well,
country.
I've been wanting to, but I will be happy to share whatever information I gain
I
from.
was out of the country the last time they opened it to CSOs and the public kasi. But maybe we can talk about Article 6. Kasi
Mhm,
since last year, there was a hope na magkakaroon na ng parang final mukha, especially in the
mm,
6.4, 6.1, and how it will actually help us in the Philippines. And they actually thought na by bond may ma-advance na kahit papano, but we
mhm,
now are seeing a lot of news saying that maybe Azerbaijan is the year we get really a carbon market at Article 6 to be finalized.
Well, it's been identified as a priority, of course, of the presidency, no, to finally put, well, not put an end, but to but to finalize arrangements in relation to Article 6, no. So, it's mostly on the modalities, procedures, and governance frameworks of the article, and they're actually key to unlock yung significant finance flows and equitable emissions reductions. So, um, I am not an Article 6 expert. I'm afraid that goes into my inability to follow math very well. Um, pero there have been news of developments as to how, for example, the Article 6 body has already put together guidance on
Yeah.
how to proceed. So, based on our reading naman of the convention and of the Paris Agreement, uh, this guidance is supposed to be brought to the COP, and to the CMA for them to decide on how to adopt or how to move forward with the guidance they've provided on operationalization. So, this one, initially, there were some civil society organizations, some concerns among civil society na tama ba yun na it's the body that came up with the guidance rather than it having been arrived at by the parties. And it seems that it's all right. It falls within the allowable process naman. So, of course, this does not mean that it's adopted already. So, I mean, if it is, then it would be a huge step forward in the Article 6 discussions. But it does not mean it's already adopted. It's something that has to be discussed by the parties at COP29. But it is hoped that the fact that it has already been put together by assumed na technical experts, that it will be something that is already acceptable to the parties, and that it can be passed with less, I wouldn't say no argument, but less argument moving forward. So
I think
hopefully.
before we go to the question in our comments, I
Mhm,
also wanted to ask about one of the sectors that have been very active in the recent years is the negotiators on the farming and agriculture sector.
mhm,
Like they've been active in the loss and damage negotiations,
mhm,
SBs, also at COP last year. And I've also been able to be part of their COP 29 trainings recently.
mhm,
How do you see this? Like, what's the importance of having this block of agriculture sector in Asia Pacific being like a solid block in a negotiation like COP, especially if na agriculture is actually enshrined in the Paris Agreement.
mhm. Yeah, I think that would be, we have for the longest time been trying to put a negotiating block together on ASEAN, for
Yeah.
ASEAN. And there have been attempts. There's actually ANGA. I'm not sure if you're familiar with ANGA. So it's a ASEAN negotiating group on agriculture
Yeah.
that has tried to engage more fully and more um, strongly in the agriculture negotiations. And to a certain extent, it has accomplished its goal. Um, I think for sure having uh, a strong bloc that can represent ASEAN interests in relation to agriculture is critical. Agriculture, I believe, I cannot exactly remember where I found it, but it's among the lowest funded
Yeah.
sectors.
4%.
4%, 'di ba? Sa ano, so definitely having a strong bloc that will be able to negotiate and ensure that agriculture is highlighted, especially in relation to finance, the provision of capacity building and technology transfer, is critical for the region. Um, as the Philippines mismo, wala tayong mitigation target, right?
Yeah.
In addition to agriculture. It's primarily adaptation, but we are not closing the door, for example, to mitigation co-benefits. So at least in that sense, a more holistic approach to agriculture can be ensured by still providing agriculture finance, and ensuring that moving forward, um, equitable ang climate action in relation to agriculture. I believe for this COP, it's going to just be a workshop, if I'm not mistaken, and some discussion moving forward on operationalization. Um, but still, ensuring that across the board in cross-cutting themes, agriculture is highlighted and given attention would go a long way towards um, helping yung addressing the needs and priorities of ASEAN countries.
Yeah, I asked because I was with Anga last week, and
Mm.
I think one of the things that we've talked about is giving agriculture a commensurate support in the LND, because
Mhm.
hindi mentioned, and that actually
Mm.
connects to Ms. Kato's question on does the Philippines hosting of the Loss and Damage Fund Board give us a bit of leverage in raising issues in the negotiations, given that we don't have a lot of wiggle room in G77 in China?
I think for sure, no. That is, I think it's been said also by our representatives of our government na there is, it's, paano ba sabihin? Ambag natin yon, no? So, ambag natin ang pag-host ng fund sa efforts in relation to loss and damage. And hosting the loss and damage fund board really gives us a bit more uh, say when it comes to discussing. At least it strengthens our voice when it comes to matters relating to loss and damage uh, in the issues and in the negotiations. So I wouldn't say, well, it's a bit difficult for the Philippines to argue in G77 in China because we are, in a sense, we are a lone voice. We don't have a subgroup, but it provides us, we are given more, there is more, I would say, gravitas when it comes to now that we are the host of the board. So definitely, it gives us a bit more leverage.
Yeah, but I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was told by some of negotiators of other African countries that they don't really expect negotiators to really focus on LND this year, because meron namang LND talks outside of COP.
Yes, oo. So for L&D at COP this year, although it was identified as a presidency priority, um, it's really more organizational or operationalization yung discussions, no? So it's how the bodies are supposed to coordinate with each other. It's how to smoothen processes on L&D. So it's not really that substantive, aside from the review of the WIM, of the Warsaw International Mechanism. So it's not really that heavy. The heaviest discussion will really be on the NCQG, and in relation to that, loss and damage, though, is still important, is still a thematic area that needs to be looked out for. Because yun nga, we're trying to push for loss and damage receiving being a thematic area that is recognized in the NCQG for finance.
Yeah, and before I let you go, Siguro, speaking of the thematic areas, are you happy with the schedule?
Um, well, you go into COP expecting sleepless nights.
Yeah.
So and overlapping schedules. So I think it's par for the course. Not exactly happy about it. Pero it's par for the course. I think um usually naman sa schedule, it tends to be more general if they're thematic days, no? So parang we have the events, we have the side events, we have ministerials that revolve around those thematic days. But the negotiations tend to bleed into each other, literally and figuratively. Joke lang. Hindi, but the negotiations tend to overlap naman across the thematic days. So yeah, so it's a pretty packed COP. It's a bit surprising na there are some days that have multiple themes actually. It would be good if they're able to disaggregate the themes a bit more, but I guess since there's limited time, then inevitably some of the themes have to share days.
But siguro one thing I wanted to point is the inclusion of, like last year we got the inclusion of health, and this time around human development. So
Mhm.
in urbanization, parang they are now acknowledging the intersectionality of climate change, but pinilit pa rin nila na sobrang dami.
Sobrang dami, sobrang dami. Parang my concern about having all like multiple themes in one day is how much time and attention can you really devote to a sub theme for the day, no? So parang baka meron mga masapawan na parang na events, and I think the difficulty pa with the Azerbaijan COP is that there's limited participation.
Mhm.
So
Yes,
there are less
definitely.
people who can participate in the COP, and then it's very cost prohibitive. So
Yeah.
so yun, so parang we're it feels like we're not maximizing the capacity of COP to really shed light on certain issues in relation to climate change. But at least discussions will continue, and perhaps there's still a lot of discussion that can take place on the different themes and sub themes, even though we're not able to fully maximize them.
Yeah, and then one thing I actually also realized is they really allotted a 1 day for final negotiations. So I think they don't want to go over the days, because if you're actually a first timer at COP, you would actually know that it extends up to like 1 2 days, and now they're setting a final day for final negotiations. So hopefully we get the final negotiations on the final day, really. Kasi ang mahal, ang mahal
We
ng.
hope. Kasi sobrang mahal ng hotel eh. So sana talaga.
So I think with that, maybe one final message to our journalists here at the call on what do you think would be the things they need to focus on at COP? Like, what are the stories that are not really unheard, or stories you would like them to focus on as they go to Azerbaijan?
I think for sure, sorry, let me just sorry. I think for sure, it will if it's first time to go to COP. I think it really tends to be overwhelming. But uh, for that, I think it would be good to identify what which areas really are important for you to follow. I think finance would definitely be something that is going to be something featured really heavily at this COP, particularly the NCQG. But other work streams or thematic areas, I think that are able to show relevance to the Philippines in the human condition. We just had another typhoon, um, and that I feel the value of being able to share what happens at COP also lies in being able to connect it to what's happening on the ground, and how the developments there are relevant to what we are facing here, you know, and what we need to work on here in the country. So if we are able to include more of the human element, um, maybe if we are able also to highlight issues or perspectives that haven't been given as much traction or as much attention before, then it would be good. highlighting the intersectionalities when it comes to climate change would broaden the discussion further, and allow us to view things more holistically, and maybe it will be able to make waves at the negotiations as well, because there's a tendency to be uh, siloed in terms of the negotiations, and that's actually a negotiation strategy for a lot of countries. So if we are able to broaden perspectives in relation to that, it would be great.
Thank you so much, Niner. So, I'll see you at COP next week. Thank you and maraming salamat. They're actually asking for your presentation, so if you can just maybe share it with me so I can share
Sure.
it with our viewers after this call. For those who want to stay, I'll be presenting some tips on how you can report to COP kasi I know some of you are first timers. So I'll just be sharing some tips, but you're welcome to if you just went in to listen to Niner, you're welcome to um go out right now, go out of the call right now. It's okay. I just wanted to do this presentation for those na alam ko first time and kinakabahan, and I know I've been there, and kaya nyo to. But here are just some tips that I actually came up with during my years at Reporting Out Cup that might maybe help you with your reporting. So again, thank you, Niner. See
Thank
you
you so
next
much. See
week.
you next week.
Yeah, next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, so reporting at COP, there are just three things you need to think about when you're reporting at COP, and that is you need to plan and prioritize. You need to engage and network because it's a once in a lifetime moment for some, and you need to stay adaptable and agile because it's gonna be a two week thing, and it's not gonna be easy, not just for you but also for your body. So you really have to be you have to learn your limits. So before, my my suggestion would be for you to set a clear objective and define your goals in covering the conference. Not just because it is not just not only this is strategic, but also helpful when it comes to your reporting. Lagi kong sinasabi na hindi mas okay kung alam mo kung ano yung gusto mong i-focus. Like if you want to focus on finance, go. Focus on energy, go. It would be really hard for a reporter to focus on everything because as you can see, flash namin kanina yung schedule, sobrang overlapping siya. So if you actually wanted to report on the youth and also on health, magkasabay yung araw. So kailangan niyo talagang iplano ano yung stories na gusto nyong ikwento and what message do you want to convey. You also have to do your research. I know some of you have their own fellowships that are helping you with your own research, but you yourselves have to do this to for you to be able to identify the potential story angles and interview opportunities because it's also helpful to create a daily schedule because not hindi siya kasing simple ng mga ibang conference na bababa ka lang ng hotel, ayun na siya eh. So you really have to also think of how you will be navigating things because you also have to allot time for specific sessions. Also, if you want to do interviews, minsan, swerte na lang kung makakapag-interview talaga kayo on site dahil maraming busy talaga yung mga tao. Nagtatakbo ka ng pumupunta ng susunod na sessions, mga pasok sa negotiating rooms. So you have to basically put in your calendar at time block nyo na ano yung mga ginagawa nyo and make sure you have backups just in case, and don't forget about your breaks because again this is a 2 week thing, hindi lang siya isang araw, hindi lang siya dalawang araw. If you haven't done a long winding coverage, mag-impon na po ng Bioflu at ng any emergency products dahil for sure it might really be a bit hard for your bodies. Also, network in advance is very, very important, lalong-lalo na kung umpisa unang beses mo lang sa COP at wala kang kakilala, reach out to the speakers that you would know would be there already, organizers, other journalists joining the conference. And this can lead to opportunities for interviews. This is also helpful if hindi ka naman pupunta ng Baco. Actually, for those of you who are here na will just cover online, don't be sad because lagi ko nga sinasabi na okay lang din naman na nasa bahay lang. Mas hindi ka pa nga pagod, hindi ka tatakbo kasi open naman yung mga sessions minsan online. Ang kagandahan lang na nandun ka sa conference, makikita mo yung mga tao, pwede nyo silang i-doorstop or habulin, but not necessarily naman na magpapa-interview sila sa inyo. So right now, if you're actually planning to write stories about COP, at nandito kayo sa Pilipinas, di kayo maka-fly sa Baku, already from your contacts, know already kung sino yung mga pupunta ng mga organizers and speakers. So you can actually interview them after their talks or um, madalas naman nagbibigay ng schedule in advance kung ang DNR dahil sila naman yung head of delegation. I'm not just sure this year if they actually have a pavilion. Ang sabi sa akin wala. So baka hindi ganun kadami ang DNR events unlike last year, but we'll see and I'll also let you know. I'll be there. So during you again, a to-do list is actually also good. You need to manage your time. And as I've said a while ago, do time blocking. Kasi magkaiba yung, lalong-lalo na kung nag-report kayo on TV. This might be helpful for Annie and Lou who will be reporting for GMA and ABS-CBN. Kasi magkaiba yung may time difference eh. Ang nahihirapan ako lagi dyan is kung mag-report ako ng 12 noon sa Pilipinas, anong oras na doon pag nasa ibang bansa ako? And what are the stories I can fit in during that time frame? Kasi iba yung oras doon at iba yung oras dito sa atin. So, hindi, okay siya dun sa, may, sabi, may Philippine Pavilion daw. Um, but iba kasi yung magiging ano eh, iba yung magiging oras. So, as a reporter, madali siya for text kasi submit ka lang ng submit. Pero kung mag-online report ka ng on-cam or TV report ka ng on-cam, you have to time kung ano ba yung mga hindi pa nare-report din ng mga counterpart mo sa Pilipinas. Kasi remember, if you're actually reporting for a big organization like ABS and GMA, may Reuters naman sila. So, baka na-storify na yung mga sasabihin mo. So, report something that only you can actually report about. Maybe specifically about the delegation or minsan mahirap din silang habulin. Or yung mga bagay na walang access ang wires or walang access yung newsroom nyo from home. You also have to set realistic goals with yourself. Like, really be honest about how much you can accomplish in a day. Kasi, dito dumadaan talaga yung maraming nagkakasakit din and nabu-burn out, hindi natatapos yung work because masyadong maraming gustong gawin in a day. And I can really um, I can understand that, lalo na pag first timer, excited ka eh. So, gusto mo talaga magpahitang gilas and to make the most out of it. But you have to set realistic goals then to be able to assess, you have to be able to assess din yung kung ano yung kaya mo. It's really important to take detailed notes. You're all journalists, you know how to do this, but what I'm saying about detailed notes is really keep it organized for later reference because minsan yung nasabi sa press con nung day 1 baka makonekta nyo pa dun sa mga magiging report nyo on day 7, day 8. So, really keep notes organized. So, hindi yung I know some of you would like to do like mga notebooks talaga. Pero kung gagawin niyo yun, dapat naka-organize per topic. Adapt and prioritize. Be also flexible because events might run over or change occasions. Hindi siya isang conference lang, hindi siya parang isang maliit lang na conference na magkakatabi yung kwarto. So, be prepared to walk 20,000 steps a day. So, adapt your schedule to what's more relevant in what's more interesting. So, ako ang advice ko actually ay to just attend maximum three events in a day. Kasi mawawalan ka ng time din to process it eh, kung attend ka lang ng attend. Break your day in outputs. Ito, sobrang importante to kasi if you're actually working alone, you might feel na kaya mo pa, or you might feel sometimes, hay, wala akong naka-accomplish, puro lang ako nanood. So what we always try to tell our fellows is you have to divide your day into distinct output periods para you actually also ensure ako an efficient coverage. Sa umaga, nakatapos ako ng press conference, na isulat ko siya or na na nakagawa ako ng key points. Parang get something done before midday para ma-maximize mo yung productivity mo. Use editorial calendars as well. So, plan your stories in advance para magkaroon ka ng sarili mong deadline. Kasi going to COP, hindi siya pwede yung parang pupunta ka lang nang wala kang aramas, kumbaga. So, dapat alam mo na kung ano yung gusto mong gawin at naintindihan mo na kung ano yung gusto mong storya na isulat. Kasi, um, ang ang hirap niya kasi pagdating doon very technical na yung mga usapan. Kung feeling niyo kanina yung mga sinasabi ni Niner, very technical na, mas technical pa doon kasi we really try to laymanize things kanina while we're actually talking as well. Yung NCQG, carbon markets, dapat kung yan ang isusulat nyo, dapat alam nyo na kung how to break it down to the public, and how you can actually also connect it to your reporting. And ito ay shameless plug, but we will be publishing some of our fact sheets soon na coming from the WG1 report, and we actually put in there some lines you can steal and you can use for your reporting para hindi niya kayo mag-isip. Like, kunyari, para hindi nyo na i-summarize or to write in your own words. Just, yes, yes, Lou, hopefully, magkaroon tayo ng get together, sino mga pupunta ng COP. And but bago na and maybe we can just do like a small group chat as well. Pero bago yun ay mag-ready muna tayo on going to COP. um, and communicate with your editors kasi yun nga, what I'm saying is sometimes may mga storya na nagawa na pala nila pero pinaghihirapan nyo pa, nagawa na pala ng Reuters or nagawa na pala ng wires na subscribe naman yung newsroom nyo. So provide progress and share story ideas para alam nyo din na pareho kayo ng kung anong guidance man yung mabibigay nila sa inyo. And pitch, for those who are doing it this freelance naman, pitch your story ideas early. Kasi again, hindi nyo rin alam kung some of you might not have access to the wire, so hindi nyo alam kung nasulat na pala nila. And also, will allow you for early feedback and adjustment. And yun, Jello, don't worry, mas masarap pa ang buhay mo sa amin kasi tatakbo-takbo kami doon while you nasa computer lang at nakaupo at maaaring na ikaw ay nasa aircon, kami nasa nakabilad sa araw. Joke lang. Pero I always say is, what I always say, while covering at COP is really, really um, a good environment and also a good experience for climate journalists, up and about climate journalists. Don't be sad kung kayo ay nag-online coverage lang because you will actually also have access to the same stories that we can have access to only if you actually do your story planning early. So, um, having said that, learn to say no. Recognize your limits and don't take more than you can handle. This is actually advice to myself because dati, oo lang ako ng oo pag may nagpapagawa ng report, may gustong magpa-interview, gustong magpa-cover, blah, blah. But don't stretch yourself too thin. And if you're actually doing a daily news coverage, avoid to committing to story ideas for the day. Kasi keep planning in the background. but stay flexible and prepare to adapt your coverage as events fold. Kasi hindi porket yun yung thematic day at yun yung inaabangan nyo dun sa daily news coverage nyo. Minsan may mas malaki pa. So, be prepared to be adaptable talaga. And prioritize high impact stories because parang identify which stories will actually have an impact to your audience. Ito yung isa sa mga advice na nakuha ko while reporting not just at COP but G20 kasi nasasabihan ako na while ang daming-daming nagsabi na wow, ang ganda ng sulat mo, blah, 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 blah. Tuwang-tuwa sila. Pero I realized now, back then I was still reporting for ABS-CBN, na yung story ko is not actually written for the ABS-CBN news audience. So, may disconnect. So, also think about that. Like, you're writing for your audience. So, for you to be able to write much impactful stories, so, isipin nyo yung audience nyo and also I don't identify their interests, focus your efforts on those, and balance your time on less time-sensitive stories. Kasi meron namang mga ganun sa cup. Quality over quantity, hindi kailangan, I don't know kung anong usapan nyo ng editor nyo, pero sabihan nyo na sila na hindi hindi kaya ang 3 to 4 a day. Focus on what's important and prioritize on the quality of your work. Stay hydrated and rested. Maraming nagkakasakit sa cup. Ayaw natin yun. It can really be intense and tiring. So, get enough rest. Take breaks to recharge. And burnout can really hinder your ability to produce high quality work. And after cup, some of you might write long form stories. So, um, you might need help on data analysis and fact checking as much as possible bago pa lang kayo mag-take ng break. Siyempre, mag-break kayo or mag-uwi ng Pilipinas bago isulat yung long form na after cop story. Do your structured outline as much as possible para ma-organize nyo na yung thoughts nyo bago pa kayo umuwi ng Pilipinas. Chunk your work as well. Mas madali yan, hindi lang to sa after, pati during. Um, para makita nyo kung nagkakaroon ba talaga kayo ng progress at makita nyo, natatrack nyo kung nasa schedule pa kayo. Most of you are multimedia reporters anyway, so um, maybe you can enhance your stories with images, infographics, and audio clips to make them more engaging. Again, here's the schedule for COP29. Um, minsan hindi naman as Niner said, di naman siya nasusunod kasi sa kabila ng side ay nagde-negotiate naman yung mga parties. Pero if you're trying to focus your story on maximum impact, may story kayo ng finance, syempre maganda kung nailabas natin ng November 14, may story kayo ng energy, maganda kung nalabas ng November 15 and so on. As I've mentioned a while ago, bago ang human development, pero nakakalungkot na magkakasama silang lahat. But also, would be good to focus still on health. As mentioned a while ago as well, there's an ASEAN negotiating group, yung ANGA, and Philippines is part of that. So if you're reporting on agriculture, they might be a good um, contact. Uh, Tourism and transport is also kind of like minsan patay na araw pero baka maganda this year. And this time of the year, meron ding gender equality. So I think that's new. So if you want to write about it, that might be a good feature story. And right now, nature and biodiversity and oceans are part of the negotiations. And if you actually are writing stories about COP16 in Cali, pwedeng ikutdugtong dito. And if you are a Manila reporter, madali i-connect sa Verde Island Passage. And yeah, final advice is be kind to yourself and learn how to pivot. And thank you. And I hope to meet you at COP kung nandun kayo. And just let me know how can I help you and make your reporting fruitful, insightful, and let's make the most out of it. And having said that, we hope to see you again in our next exclusive media briefing where when we do our post cop uh, event, and hopefully by then we'll be able to um, have a talk with some of the scientists on the WG2 and the WG3. I really appreciate some of you are already writing about WG1. We will be producing fact sheets and infographics in the next few weeks for you to be able to use, and for you mga walang time to digest the 93-page report, that's for you. And again, thank you, and ingat po tayong lahat. Maulan na naman. And I hope na we're uh, this is a safe space for everyone, and I hope na um, for me kasi ang importance of telling the climate story is really breaking down silos and breaking down the divides. And now that we are now have a Philippine climate media network, it's actually a space for us to collaborate and also help each other. So yun, thank you. The schedule is ju- that just for the live events, or yung schedule ay it's actually thematic days. So the COP29 presidency put out thematic days each day kung ano yung ifo-focus na mga side events and ifo-focus din ng discussions. But minsan hindi siya nasusunod sa negotiations, as Liner said. So, kung mapapansin niyo, pagpunta kayo ng COP, pag Energy Day, um, lahat ng mga side events ay about energy. Because they are capitalizing on the thematic days as well. Pero wala pa nga pong schedule of side events sa Philippine Pavilion, kasi ang gulat nga ako na meron daw, kasi ang sabi sa akin nung nakaraan ay walang budget for Philippine Pavilion, but I'm really happy that they will actually have one. Um, we will let you know pag meron po kaming information about this. We'll also let you know if we have more information about the National Adaptation Plan as well. And hopefully, last year, OML Center had a side event sa Philippine Pavilion. So if they actually have one this year, we'll also let you know so you can cover. So yun, maraming salamat po ulit. And if you have any questions, feel free to just reach out to us. Some of you have already asked our help for us to connect you to the scientists na nagsulat ng WG1 report. We appreciate that po, and maraming maraming salamat. See you all at COP, and for those na hindi attend, we'll see you at the coverage nandito lang naman. Tayo-tayo lang din magkikita-kita. So maraming salamat. Thank you. Thank you po.